Hi, I'm Justin McRoberts. I'm host of the Atcho podcast. And for the last going on 20 years, honestly, I have made being at the Jubilee conference a priority of mine. I'm there every year. And part of why I'm there is not just because it's like the favorite of all the jobs I get to do all year as a speaker and as a presenter, but because of the access that being at Jubilee conference grants me to some of the smartest, most well-informed and wisest voices I've ever been around. And this conversation series, the conversation you're about to listen to, is part of a series that actually helps you and I dive deeper into some of those voices. We get to hear presentations from some of the most interesting, like I said, and intelligent people in their field who are informing us not just about the nature of their work, but the nature of the gospel, the nature of the kingdom of Christ as it is manifest and is bursting forth in all of these beautiful areas. The presentations themselves are definitely enough, but one of the things about CCO culture and about Jubilee is there's always a little bit more. And so this is that little bit more that you and I get to dive into. I really enjoyed these conversations, particularly this one. Why don't you check it out? Enjoy.
This is really fun. Fun is not the word. This is such an engaging book. Byron and I talked about the book and the way you went about putting the book together. It's one of those, and you know this like we do important things, and sometimes important things can come with like this weight and the seriousness that's like off-putting. And while it's like there are weighty themes and topics in here, this is a really invitational book, and like it draws readers in. Your reference points are broad, which for heavy topics is a bit of a trick. And so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about like the sort of, not just the impetus for the book, because you talk about it in the book. So talk about the impetus of the book, but also like talk about approaching this topic from an invitational standpoint. Is you're asking folks to do some serious work with their lives and with their time, and you do it in book form. Talk about that process for you. Like, why a book? Who are you talking to? What was this?
So, part of my story is being a lover of books and literature. So I was on a track to be an English professor, community college, high school teacher / basketball coach. And really, like we've talked about at Jubilee, Jesus changes everything. And so that shifted for me.
Yeah.
I recognized that I could have served Jesus in that vocation, but I realized there was a call for me to serve as a pastor. And yet I knew that part of me, that literary side, God was going to use that. And so in a lot of ways, reading Black books is the bridging of those two sides of my story, is my literary studies, my interest in books, and then trying to serve the church, trying to serve believers, new, young, old, mature.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to write something that would invite people to see that there is a way of listening to literature and stories with an ear for both the story, but also with the lens of the kingdom. And when those two things are brought together, we're able to learn and to grow from diverse experiences as we encounter them in literature, bringing together both the power of literature to shape and to form, but also to understand the gospel's power to most deeply shape and form. So I wanted to sort of write this book as something that could guide people into African-American literature who had maybe never taken that journey.
Yes.
But then at the same time to go deep enough that those who were familiar could feel rewarded for taking up the process.
I love this. When you talk about, there's a kind of like a battle here in the creative process among people who make books, where they talk about whether you're supposed to think about your audience or not think about an audience, right?
Yeah.
You're giving me the nod already. You know what I'm talking about. And you know where we're going with this question is there's this pure art thing, and you can tell I don't believe it when I'm about to say it. This pure art thing was like, you just make art and it's just for you. And then, audience considerations be damned. Like, we're not considering. I don't buy that. I think there's a bit of an interplay there. This is a book that has, to some degree, like a particular orientation to an audience. I'm not going to make a bunch of assumptions. Who are you thinking about as you're putting this together? Were there particular people? Was this like, it's too big a jump to like, this is a book for white cats. That's not what this is.
Right.
But so talk about, like, you're writing for an audience a bit. There's a little bit of an agenda here. Talk about that process for you. Who are you writing for?
Yeah, so audience, in one sense, I am writing for myself in a way in the sense that for me, when I was studying literature in undergrad and in graduate school, I was engaging with a lot of these great texts and other great texts too. But I always felt like I needed a class after the class because, I was learning at a non-Christian university. I loved my professors. It was great. But I always felt like I would get into the text and the story and the theory and be deeply moved. But I felt like, okay, now I need to like sit and sort of translate this and ask, like, what does this mean for me as a disciple of Jesus? And so I felt like I needed a class after the class. So in a lot of ways, I wrote this book to work out some of my own thinking, but then as an act of service to offer that to others. So I think as a Christian, a writer, pastor, minister, my job is to serve, right? And so I want to write things that serve the church.
Yep.
So I wanted to write this in a way that I thought about high school students. I thought, could a high school student that's really engaged in literature, loves storytelling, I want to write this in a way that they'll be stretched a little bit, but they could pick it up and they could read. Yeah. I wanted to write this for the people in the churches that I pastored that, summer 2020, everything is going down, George Floyd killing, all of these things. People are asking questions about justice, race. How do we make sense of these tragedies? And what's the story of race in America, Christianity in America, and all these things? I wanted to write this book to show them that, hey, we don't need to sort of hop on the latest trend to answer these questions. There are actually Black intellectuals who've been thinking about these things for a long time.
Yes.
We can read these stories. You might need a guide to read them. Let me be that guide so we can learn together. So I wanted to write this for high schoolers, mature Christians, college students, grad students, people studying literature, really to try to serve and to read these stories in such a way that they can push us closer into the vision of the kingdom.
Were there books that did this for you earlier in life?
Yes. Well, the interpretive part or just the part of just deep formation?
Well, kind of both. In other words, because we learn the language, we learn our interpretive language from someone else who's doing interpretation. So talk about that part. Were there books that helped you read the world specifically from the standpoint of Blackness? Were there books that introduced you and gave you language and a bridge early on? And what were they? Who was writing that?
I think, I don't know if it was books for me early on. It was actually people and conversations. Yeah.
All right, tell me about that.
So, give a shout out to my Uncle Harold, down in Pasadena. When I would go down, I would spend a lot of summers with him, really every summer with him and my Aunt Claudine, probably from age 7 to 10. I grew up single mom, just me and my mom, dad not in the picture. So my Uncle Harold is a really important figure for me.
Yeah.
Every summer would come down and he would give me some sort of education on African-American history.
Really?
And I didn't really want to do it, whatever
he came
it was.
He's
like, hey, we're going to talk about this. Or you're going to watch this documentary. Or
you're going to... He instigated this.
Oh, absolutely.
Like an educator.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow,
an informal educator. Yeah. I mean, he's a brilliant, great man, great knowledge of scripture. And also, holds his own on the street. He can do all these things.
Love it.
So that was the lens for me. That was a voice of formation for me. That was really critical in terms of sort of understanding cultural dynamics, racial dynamics, and thinking about those things in my history as an American, and then as an African American, and then also as an African American Christian as well.
Yes.
He really brought a lot of those things together for me. Later, I would read books, theory and different sort of things that were helpful, but I really credit a lot of that to him.
I love that it comes through the doorway of, there's a thing to be said for oral tradition, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That is... while it's not absent from histories that identify as white now, like Irish history, there's there's a oral folk tradition, but the oral tradition in Black culture, whether it's the passing on of song or passing of story, has played a dominant role, and it's to some degree, and this is why I'm asking where your reference points were. To some degree, it's why there are gaps in understandings of story or understanding of our interpretive understanding of even a shared history, that the stories told in Black neighborhoods about their experience of America are shared among Black families on Black streets and are different than the stories being told or propagated in white neighborhoods. Yeah. And it is like the continuation of oral tradition. And we really don't grasp most of the time that we are in a formational process. And when you're telling stories, you're binding a community together,
absolutely,
around a certain narrative and agreeing to truths. So intentionalizing that, your Uncle Harold, I'll shout out to Uncle Harold.
Yeah, that's right.
He intentionalizes it, say, hey, these are the things, he makes you conscious of these are the things that are true of us as people. Talk about, so that was Pasadena. Where were you living when you were, where did you grow up?
I grew up in North Seattle suburbs, Linwood, Washington, and then I did about 4 years, 8th grade through junior year high school in Lowell, Massachusetts, the home of Jack Kerouac, the writer On the Road.
Yeah.
So I kind of bounced back and forth between West Coast and North Boston and kind of hop back
So
and forth
if I say the word home, where's your heart go?
Oh, man, that's tough. I mean, it does go to both places. I think in terms of duration, I would probably say Northwest or Seattle. Yeah.
Why?
I was there the longest, finished high school there, and then I ended up, a lot of my early adult life was also in Washington State. So I would say, my Boston journey was formative, but that was like a piece of my adolescence. I would probably say home is really Northwest.
What got you to Boston?
Oh, my mom remarried. So moving with stepdad, it was either he's coming to us or we're going to him. So we decided, let's try a new adventure. So went to Massachusetts and learned a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of good friends there, but really different. Lowell is kind of a little bit of a, not so much now, but then a much grittier place than a North Seattle suburb. So there was some education that happened, but good friends and great people, and a lot of affection for that place.
That's really good. So a couple of things from the book that I want to reference, then I want to pivot from there. One is, I love that you you write a lot about the Toni Morrison book Beloved, and in my personal history, that was the first book I read in which when we were being handed the book, it was like, this is a Black story. It wasn't just like, here's a book and the author happens to be Black, because the book is so much about Blackness and the Black experience. You read this book and you make these wonderful reference points about Beloved. It's a complex book, and for folks who should read the book, like, why is that book so important? Because it plays a really, like, there are a lot of folks who read the book. Mm-hmm. Why is Morrison's Beloved so important to read?
Yeah, so I would say it's probably one of the most important American novels, certainly one of the most important 20th century novels. Toni Morrison, one of our greatest writers, she passed away a few years back, written many novels. I think Beloved in particular, she's dealing with sort of the question of memory and healing for African Americans in light of the legacy of slavery. Yeah. And so it's set in Ohio, and it's set in sort of this one household and this one family that's haunted by this ghost. And it's really the trauma of the past in many ways. Yeah. It's a really complicated novel.
It is.
Both in terms of its form, but also it's also difficult in terms of its content.
Yes.
And I think because of that, it's sort of this opportunity to recognize that the past is never really past, and we need to face our history in order to actually heal. It has to do with our memory. Yeah. And that's a really significant aspect of the journey of each of the characters. Yeah. They have to deal with these memories that are of the sort that you really never want to surface again.
Yep.
But they can't escape them.
Well, because that's not the way memory works. Mm-hmm. Like human memory, our soul, if you remember a thing, your brain doesn't keep a calendar. It's not like, well, that was last Tuesday. For the soul, that was right now. Mm-hmm. Like it's right here. Yep. It's right now.
It's present. Yep.
There's a moment in the book where she writes a story that dude's name is Macon Dead, and that he gets his name because when he's asked, well, like a family member was asked, like, who is your father? What was his name? And he says, my father's dead. And so they write down the name Dead, and that they became their last name. I remember reading this as a high schooler and being shocked that someone else got to name me and name my family, and I never had never had an experience quite like that, and it shook me into like the beginning of awareness that that's a story, like, I don't have a reference point at all in my memory, in my cultural memory. It was so outside my experience in Soapbox that, like, someone else named me, and that has now become my family name. That was wild at the time, and that's part of the Black experience, and that's part of why reading Black stories is vital. Vamp on that for a minute, and that's part of what you're doing. Is like, you need to learn stories that aren't like yours, and they're outside of your history and perspective.
Yeah, and I think that the value of that I mean, it's really hard to categorize. I think learning from experiences beyond our own through the power of story and literature. I think poetry can do the same as well. So can film and art, right? But specifically, we're talking about literature. I mean, it happens in a few different ways. One, reading a novel is a really immersive experience, right? Usually in conversation with people, we talk, but we're also at the same time, we're thinking about, okay, how can I respond? Yes. How can I listen well, right? When we're reading a novel, we really actually sort of like shut part of that down in a different way by the power of reading, by the dynamics of reading, and actually by immersion. We're sitting for maybe like 200, 300 pages with the world that's been crafted by an author. They've thought about the syntax, they've thought about the cadence, they've made a decision about every single thing that's happening. Yes. And so now we're immersing ourselves in that. And we're not doing that in order to sort of like respond and argue. We're just kind of coming along for the ride. And that forms us in a deep way, right? For empathy, attention, listening, and broadening our perspective. The other thing that happens as we read literature is we recognize both the particularities of whatever we're reading. So African-American literature, we realize, oh, here's a thing that's specific to that experience that I never thought about, this naming.
Yeah.
But that's also in a way specific to this culture. But in another sense, it's universal. Yes. I also have a name. And how was the naming process for me similar and dissimilar for the naming process for these people?
Yep.
So you realize the universal and the particular through the power of literature. So in one sense, literature helps you recognize, look at what this culture, this place, these people have gone through. Mm-hmm. Look at how they've made it through trials and triumphs. What a testimony to the human spirit, which we know is part of being made in the image of God.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's distinct and different for them, but also like I can see connection to like my story and my country and my people without discrediting or flattening theirs. And we recognize in that way that like we're distinct, but we're also bound together in this story of the world. So I think the power of literature, diverse voices, it does that universal work and it does that particular work. And I think if we do it well, we recognize the places where we're dissimilar, but we also recognize we share this common humanity under God as well.
And I like the emphasis on story because it takes, especially, different cultures, different histories, it removes the engagement from the context of like information. This is information about a thing that happened. Yep. It's data.
Yep.
And it becomes a relationship with an ongoing human reality. And that is a fundamentally different experience. It's one thing to say, here's the history of Black persons on this continent. That's information.
Yep.
And you can know that. Mm-hmm. You can have, which we do.
Yeah.
I mean, let's talk about it for a second. It's not like we don't know. But it doesn't change anything in the human heart to have the data. That doesn't change anything. If I'm in a story, that engagement it forges a relationship that actually does work in me that I'm no longer in control of. If I'm in a story and I allow myself space to be in a story, I can control the information and I can do with the data what I will. But a story contextualizes me in it.
Yep.
And now I actually have to be reshaped. I want to hear you talk. You said a second ago, you talked about the Morrison book, and this is part of why I think it's an interesting book in this conversation, because when it's handed to me in school, it was handed to me on the like for merit. Like, this is a great book by a great author.
Yep.
Who happens to be Black.
Yep.
That's not bad. It's fine. But books handed to us by way of merit versus the instruction, the call to read Black stories, engage with Black narratives. Not even necessarily regardless of merit, but I would love to hear you vamp on this. When we talk about, because this is one of the pushbacks, right? One of the pushbacks is like, engage, listen to Black stories or listen to women.
Yeah.
Like, no. Listen to whoever's good. Yep. Like, the pushback is like, let's just run with the merit system.
Yeah.
And if it's good, then you'll engage with it. And if it happens to be female, if it happens to be male, if it happens to be Black, or if it happens to be Chinese, then that's great. But we're going to stick with merit. Tell me why that misses.
Yeah, I think that misses because it assumes that we're in a cultural context or in a system that just only looks at merit. It forgets that we have dominant cultures and minority cultures. It forgets that there are structures and ways in which historically we have actually tried to cut out certain authors and certain voices,
Yes.
up until a certain time, if you're getting a PhD in English literature in America, like instead doing that in African-American literature, writing on somebody like more, Ralph Ellison, for example,
Yes.
or something, that wouldn't have been, your supervisor wouldn't have approved of that, So we do have to recognize that there's a context in which we're saying, hey, let's broaden what we're reading. Now, naturally, we also know that women are, like all people, are also like men, and Black people are also like Asian people, and Caucasian people. We're all capable of writing really great books and really bad books.
Yes.
So as we read widely, we do think in terms of like, okay, well, what's actually good within this genre?
Yes.
But we do have to recognize we're getting reductionistic if we say, well, let's just read the good books. We're
ignoring the
history.
fact that the system, the merit system, any meritocracy actually has context in a culture.
Absolutely. Yep.
Like you don't have, there is no actual universal standard, like just broad global historical universal standard.
It's all
we just had this
embedded.
conversation with another presenters about what we mean by when we say the word good. And it's always contextualized by history and by your narrative. And part of what we miss with meritocracy is like what you understand as quality and what is and isn't quality is actually dictated by the narrative you're living in, whether you know it or not.
Totally, and especially in art, that shifts and changes as well.
Yes, even in a given culture,
even within a culture. That's right. Which I think again is really important. It presents the importance of reading widely, even within our own streams. So we can get that broader view.
I'm going to talk to you about hope, and there's another reference point in the book. And I'm going to try to find the page so that you can read a little bit of it. But this is a couple weeks ago. Kirk Franklin had this really cool moment at the Grammys. I don't know if you saw the Grammys at all. I didn't watch most of the Grammys, so I saw some of these clips. But Kirk Franklin gets up and he has this moment. He's like basically song leading from up front and bringing people into the thing. And he says the thing that so it's like we're taking you to church and this whole thing and it gets people like these like A-list celebs up there like singing songs and I was like, it's not magical. It's magical. It's like really, really cool. And one of the comments, I think I saw it on Instagram. One of the comments had to do with the kind of hope. They talked about like Black gospel music and hope. That like there's this hopefulness in Black gospel music, and it stirred this thought in me about like there is a particularity to Black expression of hope in America. That part of what your book gets to is like it's not just information that you might need because you have Black neighbors. This is probably good for you. If you live outside of a Black context, there are ways that Blackness has experienced trauma, history, and hope that can be formative, informative for cultures outside of Black culture. And part of what I think happens with folks' engagement with something like Black gospel music is there is an emotional, like deep sub-psychology experience of Black music that like, well, let's name, that's not just a good feeling. You're actually in touch with a history that could be really helpful for you if you really understood like that's where that hope came from. And you get to this, I'm going to try to find, I don't know exactly what page it is on, but you talk about hope. And the phrase at the top of the page is, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I see hope. You're talking about Coates, the author.
Oh yeah, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Yeah,
who I love, and his series. He did a series on with Marvel. No, with DC, and he wrote.
Black Panther.
He wrote Black Panther, but he also did a series with Cyborg, which was absolutely incredible. See that. So if you have another great Black story, but he writes about he's talking about post George Floyd. And he says, I can't believe this, but I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I see hope. And he talks about progress. He sees hope because there's progress happening right now. And then you write this. But what happens if the progress stops? Your next paragraph is, my hope is not wrapped up in the enlightening of people. This is, I would suggest, like culturally scandalous. To point at whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement, which is beautiful, and you suggest limited. That like there's a hope story, but if my hope rests on these moments of progress and the enlightening of people, I'm gonna be disappointed.
Yeah.
Can you I don't know, did you find the page?
I did find it. Yeah.
So can you dig into this? Because this was one of the moments in the book I was like, dang, that's a lot to come to the table with. It's a lot to say, especially because for folks engaging in these stories on TV or on Twitter or whatever, that's where my hope is. My hope is like we're in the streets, we're marching.
Yeah.
And now I've got hope. And you're saying like, that's nice. That's good.
Yeah.
But there's gotta be more. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this is from my chapter on hope. I would recommend people read the wonderful poem by Margaret Walker called "For My People," which I'm kind of working from for this chapter. Yes. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways this is it's such an essential Christian truth that it's easy to forget that our hope is really not wrapped up in progress or people. It can't be. It's actually wrapped up in Christ and His kingdom. And it's His kingdom at work through people, which He's going to bring. That is our ultimate hope. So I think, for example, Coates is a really interesting person to think about here, because so much of his writing has been great in the assessment of the conditions of racism and injustice in America, such that he recognizes in that assessment he sees no hope at all, which is why it was so moving to hear him say, I can't believe I'm going to say this, I see hope, I see progress right now. He's talking about 2020. He's talking about people marching in the street. He's talking about people recognizing structural, personal racism and injustice. He's talking about companies trying to do something to be more diverse, more equitable, all that sort of stuff. He's talking about a lot of stuff that we've seen fall apart over the last 4 years. He's talking about a lot of stuff that we've seen, this didn't run as deep as we thought, or maybe this was a little bit misshapen from the beginning. He's recognizing these are causes for hope, but time has shown us what we know to be true. Yes. Our hope cannot be in people apart from the transforming work of God's grace and God's kingdom. So I think for me, what I'm trying to point out, I'm trying to say, there's a recognition that we do want people to grow and to change and to live more rightly and more justly. We ought to work for that. As we work for that, we ought not be duped and to think that that is the end-all be-all hope, or we ought not be duped to think that people's change and people's growth and people's transformation is permanent and salvific. It's not. People are like us. We change, we grow, and we fall back, and we do things for wrong reasons, and we're hypocritical, and we're motivated improperly, and we also just crumble and fall apart. So if we know that people are actually like us, we recognize that as we try to work for change, we want to see people grow, we want to see society change, we work for that. But we know that's not ultimately where hope is based or found.
Yes. And again, the scandal of this, and this is we forget that the gospel is actually scandalous. Mm-hmm. And we ought to be scandalized by the kind of hope that Christ presents. And you get to this when in the chapter about Morrison's Beloved, you talk about healing. One of the things, again, it's not particular to the Black story in America, but it is antithetical to the way maybe more privileged cultures understand hope and progress, is that not everything comes to a point of healing. Yeah. Some things in life are simply endured. That we want a healing story, but some things in life just require endurance. And that maybe too oft quoted King notion of like, I can see the other side of the mountain. Yeah. We're gonna get there, and then he dies. Mm-hmm. Like there's always a next, there's always a more. Talk about your your hopefulness, like as a person, an author. You're doing this work. You're in the mix with people. Talk about your hope. What are the things that you're enduring? Where are you seeing hope? How are you sustaining? Give me a little bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I take a lot of hope from I take a lot of hope actually from kind of the main person that's brought the gospel to the world, that was used by Christ, which is the Apostle Paul. And actually look at a lot of his life, a great deal of his time marked by beating and imprisonment. And, he writes when he's in chains, he says, I'm in chains, but the word of God is actually not bound. So he has this sort of endurance capability that comes from his knowledge of the king and the kingdom in such a way that he just keeps going.
Yes.
And it's actually the fruit of his ministry, God at work, that's brought forth something that, I wonder, could Paul imagine,
Yeah.
that this gospel that's both for Jew and for Gentile, for all nations, all people, it's really actually happening. So I find him as a figure that I continue to be fascinated by, right? Like all believers. So I find a lot of hope there. I find hope when I see people, like you said, that just keep going when life is extremely hard.
Yeah.
Hard in ordinary ways and hard in extraordinary ways. So like when I see people that do all that they can to actually just like come to church,
yes,
like, and they made it, they're there. Like I take a lot of hope from that.
Yes.
When I see students, I'm near UVA, I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia. When I see students who there's a lot of pressure to achieve. There's a lot of pressure that your GPA and that internship, that is who you are. Mm-hmm. And they cut down on their study time. They cut down on their time where they could be padding the resume to like be engaged in campus ministry, maybe come to something like Jubilee.
Yep.
And that stuff gives me hope because it shows me, okay, God is at work in these small ways that actually change lives.
That's really good. What are you reading right now? Like what's on the list of things that you're reading right now?
Yeah, right now, what am I reading? I'm rereading one of my favorite novels, Silence by Shusaku Endo. It is a great novel about Catholic missionaries who go to Japan, and it sort of, he delves into the history, this horrific period of persecution of Christians in Japan. So I highly recommend that to people. So I'm rereading that again. It's one of my favorite writers. Yeah. Also reading a novel, Underworld by Don DeLillo. He wrote his most well-known novel is White Noise, kind of a critique of sort of modern life in America. Huh. It's a big one. It's 800 pages. I'm 200 pages in, so I'm enjoying that. So those are my two novels, and then got other fun stuff on the side that's a little bit lighter, but those are the two I'm spending a lot of time with.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Well, man, thank you for your time. Sincerely, this was wonderful.
Yeah,
appreciate
it.
And thank you again for this book. It is among the things that we are really hoping folks pick up. This is such a loving invitation into a challenging practice that it's a profound and wonderful book, and you did a great job with it.
Thank you, Justin. Been a pleasure.
You got it, man.